A very warm welcome to everybody and a good afternoon from all of us in the UK. Wonderful to have our alumni with us, our global community of fellows. It's just a shame that we weren't able to do this in person, given the circumstances. My name is Pally Smart and I am the head of the School of Management here at the University of Bristol. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here as host today, to be the host for really the first of our events from the School of Management's Discovery Series for our alumni. We hope to create a platform today to share our cutting edge research and our thought leadership with you, and harness an opportunity for lifelong learning and executive education, and to continue discussions about really important issues within business, government and society. As a school, as a new school, we are focusing on some of the most pressing issues of our times, global and societal challenges. We really want to drive forward some of these big issues around the world, and of course, the world of work and how that is changing, our working environments, our working patterns, and of course, our workforce is a key issue that we are addressing inside the school through our research and our teaching. The past 18 months, I think, has shown all of us how things can change so much with our work and home lives. And today will be an opportunity to think more about the future of work. As I said, that these issues are not just driving our research and our thought leadership, but they're also driving our teaching for our students. And I'm really pleased to be able to say that over the last 48 months, we have been working really hard to deliver some new postgraduate programs that are directly addressing some of the new demand that we're seeing for skills in areas such as business analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning and big data. Strategy, change and leadership is our executive master's program. And we're also the first in the UK to offer a specialist master's program with a particular focus on the future of work and human resource management. And next year, we're going to be launching our new international business and strategy MSc, which focuses on global challenges. So there is a lot of exciting things going on at the School of Management. I'd like to welcome you to this event today and thank you in advance for all the questions that you've submitted. You can continue to submit via the live Q&A function. And if we don't get round to answering your questions, my kind colleagues have offered to try and respond to those after the event. So please do email us at alumnievents@bristol.ac.uk. Okay, so that's a brief introduction of what's going to be happening today. We're going to be discussing and talking and answering some of your questions around the theme of the future of work. So over to our panel. And to begin with, I'd like to introduce our panel. So we have with us Professor John Beaverstock, who is leading our research theme inside the school on the future of work. John is very interested in global talent mobilities in the fintech and professional services sector. He's also exploring competitiveness and global connectivity of the City of London's financial services sector. We also have my colleague, Dr. Jennifer Jones, who is an interdisciplinary researcher in international business and is very interested in network approaches to the global economy and the local economic development. She's also working with lots of manufacturing companies to look at the impacts of new technologies such as 3D printing. Jennifer currently is working on HRM strategies, human resource management strategies, in relation to co-working and also remote working spaces. So we'll be talking to her about some of those new things that we're seeing that are happening in the world of work. Okay, and just last week, she was awarded the Provost Prize for Academic Excellence for the School of Management inside the university. So that's really exciting. We also have with us today, Thomas Inskip, our special guest, who was, of course, indeed a student with us at the University of Bristol studying economics and management. And he has gone on to do great things and is currently the Chief Commercial Officer at Affinity. Affinity are a global organization that use data and AI to better understand and transform the quality of interpersonal relationships and interactions in a business context. He's responsible for global revenue, commercial strategy, and overseeing the worldwide general management team. Tom began his career at KPMG and has a background in investment banking with Liberum Capital in London. So, as a brief introduction of the guests that we have on the panel today. So firstly, Tom, over to you. It would be great if you could tell us a little bit more about the interesting work that Affinity are doing.
Of course. Thanks, Paley, and very pleased to be here today, so thank you for having me. So Affinity is an applied artificial intelligence company. At heart, what we do is when you call into Sky or BT or Lloyd's or Direct Line, we go to work on who you are through your telephone number. And each telephone number tells us a huge amount about you versus the next person. So this is through public, commercially available public data. Experian, Alon, Targus, how many cars you have, whether you travel frequently, your postcode, etc., job titles, but also internal data. So if it was Sky, they know how long you've been a customer, what channels you've been watching, what channel you were acquired through, and so on. All of this information presages how Paley is different to John and Tom is different to Jennifer. And we use that information to predict who within the contact center or within the available pool of agents in the contact center is the best behavioral fit for you. Mm-hmm. At heart, the basic principle is you buy more from people you like. So we're replacing the time-based assignment of people in a business context, typically a contact center, finding behavioral pairings which are more efficient than chance, and in doing so, increasing the customer experience, in turn, increasing the probability of a sale or a renewal or retention. In a banking context, it could be money collected or credit card sold, etc. We turn our pairing technology on and off. So we're on for 20 minutes, off for 5, on for 20, off for 5. At the end of a month, you look at the revenue generated whilst on versus whilst off. The difference is precisely what you attribute to Affinity. And then we charge a share of the incremental benefit we deliver. So typically 30 pence in the pound. So not a traditional software model, not sexy in that it's call centers, but very cutting edge in that it's machine learning, data, and AI, but a profitable use of AI and a use which increases the productivity of people rather than replacing people. Mm-hmm. But hopefully that's a helpful.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tom. How fascinating. And I'm thinking, you know, we hear so many people in business, government, and societal organisations talking about how important relationships are in the world of work. So I can see really interesting prospects of the work that you're doing in all sorts of different kinds of settings where human relations are really important. Okay, that's great. Thank you for that overview. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to come into the office and have been doing so for some months. And I know that not everybody has had the opportunity to do that, given the situation that we find ourselves in with a global pandemic. So great for me who can be in the office, but not great for everybody. Some people want to be in the office more, some people don't want to be in the office. I'd like to turn to Jennifer now and ask Jennifer, I'd love to hear your views on the future of the office. Is it going to continue? Is it not? What do you think is going to happen?
What a big question. I think it's something a lot of us are talking about now. I mean, I think it's hard to pick up a newspaper and not hear some manner of debate around this. And we know that that's happening within companies as well. I see two levels of this, really. I think about how much office space is used. We hear companies talking about downsizing significantly the amount of space they need. I think anyone who's invested in a flagship London headquarters is now wondering if that was the right strategy at the moment. But also how the space is configured within that, the traditional office. And I think probably we haven't really reconceptualized what the traditional office was or is since we've established them going back into the Industrial Revolution. And I think that we are now seriously questioning that. You could think of some innovations like open plan offices, but I still think the nature of work and that coming in and leaving the 9 to 5 is probably what's being questioned now, and really trying to unpick what is necessary to happen in a particular space and what can happen in other environments. And I do notice at the moment there does tend to be a binary when we're talking about the home or the office. I think we don't necessarily think of that as a binary. I think that there will be an emergence of third spaces as well, where your employer may make it available that you could use a particular co-working space, so you could meet with colleagues not necessarily in the office. So if companies can completely start to outsource some of their provision for their employees, so kind of these degrees of flexible office space. And that is a sector that we know is growing. It was growing before COVID, but we've seen a lot of increasing growth in that. We can see in the newspapers daily different firms announcing what their intentions are. Still surprising in this era of uncertainty, but we hear NatWest, we hear Ernst & Young, all declaring different levels of employee expectations for being in the office. Or more than half of NatWest staff were expected to be hybrid working. And they say only 13% of their staff they expect to return for most of their work into the office. So some different statistics coming out here, and I think there is still uncertainty about quite how we manage the way in which people work from home and in the office. How often do we need to get together? What functions need to happen in the office? I think those are all quite big questions. Architects are now very interested in this question. I know that they're getting brought in by companies to think, ripping out a lot of desk space, as much as 50%, and turning those into enticing collaborative spaces. I'm hearing about rooftop bars, running tracks. I'm pretty sure the university's not going to introduce those things. I think this might be the private sector.
Those ideas right now.
We might get some sofas, right? That might be nice. But yeah, the serious point about how to recreate these water cooler moments for how you want your staff to know each other, you want them to innovate, you want them to chat. But I think a total rethinking of this. But I do want to kind of add the caveat that we have to be careful that we are often talking about particular types of white collar work here, and that the office does cover a broader range of activities. So we shouldn't get too set on the particular types of people who might have freedoms around where they work, because lots of people are quite restricted about where they could work, which I think is another argument for this increase in these third spaces. Not everyone has a home provision to work from. So in answer to your question, what is the future of the traditional office? I don't think anyone knows yet, but it's going to be fun seeing how it works out.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jennifer. That was really interesting to learn. Certainly, it's been quite nice being in the office. This is an academic environment. We could probably, I think on our floor, there are usually about 15 people, but I probably see 4 people regularly. It's quite interesting to see that some people have really made some clear choices about wanting to be in the workplace and enjoying the interaction. But I think, certainly Zoom, Teams, they've all helped, I think, to maintain interaction to a degree. So I think you're absolutely right. We're in a period of time where things are still a little bit uncertain. It'll be interesting to see how things ultimately shape up. Tom, I just wondered if you'd like to comment on that as well, given that, from a corporate perspective, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, from my own personal experience, the pandemic hasn't been that long. We all went into it with a lot of wood to chop. A lot of projects in motion, relationship capital with various stakeholders in hand. And we've managed really well through an 18-month period. But I think, I think that's led us into a bit of a false sense of security, where we can get away with remote working and Zoom and conference calls to keep the businesses moving along. But I think it's harder than we think, or we'd like to think, because it's very nice being at home on a Friday, particularly if you're a senior person in the company. But often those are the people making these decisions. But in reality, it's very hard to learn, to persuade, to explain, to create, and to problem solve if you're not in person. Those teams that do it in person will always triumph over the ones that don't. I strongly believe that. And if you want to be learning, persuading, explaining every day, then those that are in the office every day will, ultimately have superior results to those that are only in the office 3 out of 5 days. So I have, my own view has changed over the last 6 months as I've come to the end of this 18-month stretch. I've never been a fan of an office myself, but I'm itching to get back in because I'm feeling less valuable than I have done in the past, because I am a explainer and a creator and a learner. Those things are all things I value. So I think Jennifer's completely right. Offices will change to the extent that they'll be more about collaboration rather than just rows of desks, more about getting the most out of people. But I also think that over the medium to long term, there'll be a shift that's more towards the pre-COVID levels than people would like to intuit, because everyone's thinking about the new things they can do because it's a crossroads. But I think the pendulum will come back pretty far.
I think the pendulum swing is a really interesting metaphor to use here, because I certainly do remember having quite a few conversations, I would say probably last sort of May, June, July time, where people were really quite certain that actually the world is changing and it's going to be a sticky change, But I think now, another year on, I agree with you that I think the pendulum will swing back a little bit. I just wondered if I could ask you, Tom, given the nature of the kind of work that you do and the value that you add in a business context, is it too early to say anything about how the nature of business interactions or people interactions or behaviors between people may be different now than they were before? Is it just too early to say?
I think business owners with a focus on cost will see this as a chance to take cost out, remove intermediaries, remove agents, digitize. But at the end of the day, you remove people from the equation and everything becomes a little less enjoyable and less fun. And a lot of business happens because people feel good about working with the people in front of them. So it'll be really interesting the next 6 months. I think it's very hard. I think it's very hard to predict. And I think businesses shouldn't have a set plan at this point. They should be nimble, and there are examples where they've already made decisions never to return to the office, like Nationwide, for example, which was all over the BBC a few months ago. That to me just feels crazy. So. Not sure, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's something we've learned, over the last years, that fun is really important for work. Certainly, I've felt that way. I'm having a lot more fun in the office than I was at home. At home, it was very much constantly being on Zoom, but that might just be the nature of the kind of work that I'm particularly doing. Okay, thank you for that, Tom. So let's move to John. So John, I've got a very interesting question here that had been pre-submitted. Quite a long question, so I'm going to try and read it out carefully. So hybrid work, so we talk more about hybrid work these days, has always been a phenomena of knowledge intensive work. So for example, our work, but also maybe some of the work that Tom's organization is involved in. But COVID-19 has fast forwarded its intensity and prevalence in organizations. Do you think professionals will ever return to the office?
Thank you, Pally. What an interesting question. And I'd like to, thank Jennifer and Tom for their observations, because I think the death of the office is over-exaggerated. And I think what we're going to see is a repurposed office, a reimagined office for the future, an office about collaboration, creating knowledge, problem solving, and an office which is inclusive to all in terms of the flexibility between hybrid work and in-person work. I think what's been interesting about hybrid work in knowledge-intensive organisations like professional services, for example, is that it's always been an important part of that work process. blending, flexing, working in the office, but working in other locations. That may be the home, it may be with a client, it may be in another location. And this has equally been intensified during the last 18 months or so. I think professionals will return to the office, undoubtedly, and they'll return to the office for some of the points that Tom has very eloquently suggested a few moments ago. You know, the community of practice in knowledge-intensive organisations is knowledge creation, is creating knowledge, it's problem solving, it's sharing and transferring knowledge between employees, between clients and employees, and it's very much wrapped around, you know, the reputational calibre of being in a particular location. So it's not just the water cooler moments that Jennifer mentioned within the organisation, but it's also, you know, the importance of being in the office and then socialising in close proximity to the office, in the bars and the restaurants and the coffee houses, for example, where you're rubbing shoulders with your clients, your competitors, you know, you're trying to get a sort of a competitive advantage by listening and learning. And it's, you know, about that community of practice. And this is why, you know, there's significant sort of clusters and ecosystems and professional services. The City of London, for example, you know, to come back to that space, back to those office networks is going to be a really important part of, you know, setting the competitive advantage for the future. However, as Jennifer and Tom has alluded, you know, I think what we're going to see is a repurposing, a reimagining of that office space. I think what's really significant is, you know, don't underestimate, you know, the role of the office space within the central business district of, you know, of cities, in the way in which they are used to develop those agglomeration economies which create knowledge, which transfers knowledge, and which also allows the organisation to, you know, be at the cutting edge of its business systems, and also, you know, with clients being such an important part of the process. You know, many clients still expect that in-person relationship to foster trust and to, you know, develop relationships in work and future work. So my thinking about this is, yes, the office, its death is over exaggerated, and what we're going to see is a repurposing of office space. An office space which, yes, is going to be much more collaborative, much more flexible, but it's still going to be a really important asset that the firm has to, you know, do its work, but also to, you know, engage in new client relationships, but also, you know, as a fulcrum for its position and its reputation as well. That's something which is, you know, significantly important as well. The reputational value of being in a particular place within a particular city or region. That's still significantly important for, you know, organisations when they are trying to develop a global footprint. So to have a EC1 postcode is still, you know, a significantly important and reputational factor. So
yeah,
the death of the office is over exaggerated in my view, and what we're going to see is some interesting reimaginations as we move into the medium term rather than short term after the pandemic. So thank you, Pally, for the question.
Yeah, that's really interesting, John. I think you're absolutely right. I think location really matters, as you know, with places and buildings and real estate. Location really matters. So I guess the message may be that don't give up your Pall Mall address just yet. Okay, let's turn to Tom then. So Tom, as an employer, how has this change to home working affected your organisation and the people that work at Affinity, and what you're seeing around you with your client base?
So Pally, we're now 2,500 people, and we've doubled in size during the pandemic. And I think that whilst it's not always valuable for a particular person to be in the office, it may be valuable for other people to have that person in the office. If I was to generalize, it's the junior people that really benefit from being in person with the senior people. And to riff off something that Jonathan was saying, the coffees and the lunches, often it's actually just going to pick up the coffees and going to grab the lunches. And that's how you build a rapport with some senior person who's grateful for that, and as a result takes you to a meeting or invites you to a call. In doing so, creating a mentor-protege dynamic. That to me is the single most important reason to get back into the office, because anyone that's had a successful career will look back and pin it not just to their professors, but also to people that they shadowed. And you simply cannot pop a coffee on someone's desk remotely, or grab someone lunch or make someone laugh, and create that rapport. So I think it's, assuming we didn't return back to the offices, which we will, we have to, but assuming we didn't, then I think that the 20-something-year-olds leaving university and going through the grad schemes, it becomes very hard for them to see the light at the end of the tunnel and pop up and get promoted and win client business earlier than they otherwise would, and so on.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Tom. And I think you're absolutely right to be thinking about, returning to the office. I've already put a little note to myself that, some of our alumni will know that the University of Bristol is expanding and will have a new campus as well, right in the heart of the city of Bristol. So some of the great work that John and Jennifer are doing will be really, really valuable to us. So one little mental note for me is that when we return, we've got to have better coffee machines. That's really going to be quite important. Okay, so let's move on to Jennifer again. So Jennifer, how are companies managing their remote workforces, and what are the implications for workers?
Yeah, another big question. And I think one that tends to vary by the sector we're looking at, but also the type of worker. But we can note some broad trends in what's happening. I do want to note that some firms have always been using remote workers, and those proportions have been increasing. That's not just remote work internationally, that's also domestically as well. So many multinational companies do have experience of managing remote work, but that might be something functional like data entry, for example. Then if you're moving into different types of work that involve more knowledge work, I think this is where some of the challenges arise around how we manage that workforce. I think a key element that we've been discussing today is that different speeds in returning to a hybrid form of work, rather than just thinking about remote as being something permanent. And I think that's another point of debate. We can see some general trends, though, within firms, and there's three bodies that are really not competing but interacting within a company to help decide the conditions for the workers. That includes senior management, and that's their strategies around how they want their workforce operating, what the broader aims of the company are. Then the human resource professionals who are mediating between the senior management and the workers and developing the policies, the supporting policies, and then the workers themselves. And this isn't an equal relationship, and in any individual firm, those relationships will play out in different ways. And we can see that the human resource management professionals do have some challenges on their hands in terms of managing the more heavy degrees of remote work, the more remote work. I mean, some interesting questions have come up during COVID. I mean, how do you manage disciplinaries, for example, if you're online? And this is yet another argument to support our broader claims today that perhaps the office isn't dead, and that there will be some things that will draw people back into the office. And that's the big one that strikes me, is some of the really serious, heavy stuff that happens within a company. And of course, people are still being fired, people are still being hired, and how much of that do we do face to face? I do research on this on a theoretical basis, but also empirically working with companies and helping them to work out their human resource strategies. And we take an academic interest in that, not just from a practitioner's point of view, helping the companies, but also because we can see that there's two directions that a company can really head in. And one is what we call the high road, and that's where workers have quite a lot of autonomy and they're able to enjoy the freedoms of their remote work. The other is a low road, as we would call it, and that's where the company feels under pressure to monitor the employee more, autonomy is reduced, working conditions are reduced. And we know there's all kinds of technologies that can monitor keystrokes or even cameras, and they can create quite difficult circumstances for the workers. So by engaging with those three sets of actors, we're hoping that academics can be more involved in guiding companies to introduce types of work that are more beneficial for the worker, this high road, which is challenging, mainly because costs and the realities of work can often force companies towards a low road. But we're at a tipping point at the moment. I think a lot of decisions being made over the next couple of years will help determine generally how workers feel when they're remote hybrid work.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Some really interesting insights there. So Tom, I mean, you've been leading a global workforce, so surely this must have really thrown up some challenges for you that you possibly couldn't have imagined before.
Yes, I think we've lost a few people we wouldn't have lost. In all honesty, I think there's been some negative swirls around themes that I just can't imagine have gathered momentum pre the pandemic. I do think that on the whole, and this is marginal stuff, but negativity and whining is easier to do from the safety of one's own home, talking on the phone, and traditionally, positivity and celebration happens in person. So I think the balance has been tipped a little bit for a bit more negativity, a little bit less positivity. People, enthusiasm is contagious, and again, it's body language is a big part of that, and being in person. So I feel like I've had to fight a little bit to keep the camaraderie up and keep the keep people positive when things look tricky.
Really interesting.
Yeah, but I think that people have coped extremely well. But I think that 18 months is almost a cutoff. I think if it was on for another year, I think you'd see real problems.
Yeah.
So I don't think we've seen the worst of it, and I think the timing of coming out of the pandemic is actually very good.
Yeah, really, really interesting as to how it affects, sort of people's psyche really being in the office, not in the office. And one of the things that Jennifer just said, is slightly concerning in the sense that, if all the heavy lifting around HR gets done in person and all the other stuff gets done online, it raises some really interesting conundrums, I think, from, in terms of the world of work that we've been used to one that we could be migrating towards, but we're not quite sure what it is because it's still in a sort of a hybrid fashion. So given that we've had so much time with technology, a question for you, Jennifer, an obvious question really, how could new technologies, do you think, impact on the future of work?
I think probably people are expecting me to talk a lot about Zoom here and the ways that technologies are affecting, helping us in a day-to-day basis. But my mind goes rather from the office and knowledge professionals actually to manufacturing. And we know that manufacturing has been affected by COVID and by other factors, in the UK by Brexit, in the US by Trump trade policies. So this is a really important area of research for me and many of my colleagues in the management school. We all are familiar with the term the factory of the future, and underpinning that are several digital technologies that could really transform how we work, if we work in the manufacturing sector, but also in terms of us as consumers. We can see various trends. We know that there's increased automation, which creates challenges for how the public perceives that, the death of manual labour jobs. It may be instead that a factory is actually relying on higher end qualified engineers and professionals to manage the machines rather than numerous manual workers. And we're still working all of that out in terms of where that takes us in the future. But we're reminded also that manufacturing and industry is taking place within political spectrum, and we're seeing a lot of emphasis now on bringing manufacturing back to advanced economies. This is convenient in the UK because it helps us solve the Brexit problem, and it also helps us overcome some of the supply issues around COVID. Although I do a lot of work on reshoring, and I would caution us all to think that it's so simple that we're just bringing like-minded work back from one particular place to another. Actually, we're much more likely to see fragmented supply across the UK, different types of things having long chains, different types of things having shorter chains. And also, if you bring something back to advanced economies, you're more likely to invest in digital technologies in order to reduce your labour costs to make it more affordable to produce in the UK. So you can see lots of dynamics at play here. And what does that mean for workforces? That means a shift towards more highly qualified workers, challenges for countries like the UK that need to invest in engineering capabilities and education. And also for us as consumers, we're more likely to see goods produced closer to where we live. So we might see much more distributed manufacturing and much more localized. So things will be produced where the demand is rather than centralized, coordinated factories. So I think that there's a lot of talk around this in manufacturing circles, and I work heavily with 3D printing, additive manufacturing, and that sector's really professionalizing now. So we're not just talking about engineers driving this, we're getting lots more people come in from business and management schools to help drive their strategies. So it's really a real opportunity for us as a business school, but also for our alumni and our students to move into these sectors and to help shape them in ways to help us understand what the future is of how we're going to work.
Thank you, Jennifer. Really quite interesting there. Fascinating to hear about how Industry 4.0 is taking shape, and I'm hearing more and more about sort of little factories, digital factories being set up, and digital twinning. I think this is all going to make a really interesting difference in manufacturing. Some might say the real economy. Fascinating. Tom, would you like to comment on that? Anything that Jennifer's just said with regards to sort of how technologies might impact working life?
Only to really agree with what Jennifer has said. I think localizing industries, micro factories, low capex, low volume production, all of this technology is terrific for the future of work. I think that many positives. On the Zoom point that Jennifer avoided, because it's almost a cliche by this point, I do think that it's a skill, remote communicating, and it's something we've all got much better at over the last 18 months. And there's a generation below us that is been brought up to think of it as totally normal. My worry about the future of work is that we become too reliant on remote communication. We actually get better at it than we are with in-person communication. People become socially awkward, and you're more likely to get some sort of deal done over the phone or using Zoom than you are over dinner, which and maybe I'm relating this too much to my own business or industry, but I think in 50 years' time, there is a nervousness where the 8-year-olds of today become totally reliant on being the other side of a screen rather than breaking bread, and that worries me, only because I'm a traditionalist, not necessarily because it's a bad thing. Yeah.
Interesting thoughts around social skills and how they might I guess morph and evolve as time goes on. Certainly, I have to say something quite interesting that I noticed when we first when the pandemic hit us as a place of work. I found that timing myself, just talking to people on Zoom, that was a little bit tricky. You'd find yourself talking over people. And when you've sat through many, many weeks and months of Zoom meetings, you slowly learn to adapt, but it takes time. But I found myself talking over people on the phone as well. So even when I couldn't see them. So it was quite interesting how some of the behaviors that I hadn't quite got around and developed new skills around, I'd been carrying to other sort of digital environments. So really, really quite interesting. Okay, so let's talk about something that some of us haven't done for quite a long time now, which is business travel. It's an important part of working practices for lots of different types of organizations. And John, I know that some of your work has focused in this space. And I was just thinking, you know, after March 23rd, 2020, business travel just fell off a cliff. And I just wondered what your vision for business travel looks like going forward.
Thank you, Pally. Yes, I think you know, in our modern global connected economy, business travel has been, and I think will be, an important process for connecting organizations, clients, and so on and so forth. Quite clearly, what the pandemic has done is completely stopped discretionary and non-discretionary business travel within organizations, particularly international business travel. Just a couple of statistics I was looking up earlier. In 2019, there were almost 9 million business visits to the UK from international visitors, and 4 million of those 9 million were visits for business purposes to London. And that's quite a significant sort of number, because if you look back over the last decade from 2019, you know, back to the 2000s, what you see with business travel is whenever there's a crisis, the financial crisis, the dot-com boom bursting, the SARS epidemic of early 2000s, there's a dip, you know, a dip in business travel. Inevitably, you know, the business travel budget takes the hit. But for many organizations across the economy, business travel is a significantly important part of the production process for, you know, managing the organization that has national and multinational office networks, you know, for creating new opportunities for client relationships and fostering those client relationships. And of course, internationally, you know, the varieties of capitalism in different jurisdictions, you know, having an in-person meeting or set of meetings with new clients is particularly important. And there's also, you know, the importance of engaging with stakeholders, with associations, with foreign government bodies, with trade associations and trading departments in nation states. That's really important. And for you know, sectors like ourselves in higher education, going to trade fairs, conferences, conventions, you know, it's been an in-person process. But I think what is going to change, I think business travel will, like a light switch flicking back on, you know, when it's safe to travel, when the infrastructure's there. But I think what the difference will be is there will be a strategic need to look at what is discretionary that can be substituted with information technology, Zoom, Teams, and more sophisticated video conferencing software, and what is actually not discretionary. So I think the future for business travel within organizations will be to focus much more on what is required to trigger the need for an in-person meeting, which involves travel. I think the non-discretionary business travel will be culled and repurposed and will probably fall back onto, you know, information technology. Remember, in 2019, we still had a significantly digitally interconnected world economy. Yet, there were almost 9 million business visits coming into the UK, and over that decade, that had grown significantly. But I think the future will be about organisations strategically looking at what is not discretionary, what is compulsory, what is going to add value to the organisation, rather than what is routine. And of course, in professional services and knowledge intensive work, to actually be in person is significantly important, because it's all about, showing potential clients you have the credentials, the reputation embodied, which you can transfer to the client, through different transactions. So trust and reputation, is actually embodied often in an in-person relationship, particularly at the start when you're trying to discover or pioneer new client relations.
Yeah, fascinating, really, really important, and particularly important, as you said, for an organisation like ours. Tom, business travel must be a huge part of your world. You're a global company. So how do you see this affecting you? How has it been affecting you?
So I think, Paley, that it had probably got a little bit out of hand, business travel in general. And for us, there are just many trips that in hindsight probably weren't necessary. And that there is a technology component to this. Super fast broadband of 2025 is very different to, 5 up, 5 down of 2015. And we're sort of on a very steep curve in terms of advancement around rural connectivity and so on. So I think Mother Nature has played her part and sort of wound everyone's necks in a little bit, but that may only be a 5-10% reduction in relative business travel. The rest, if we could have got away without traveling, before, we would have done. Traveling is for work is not is a sacrifice. You leave your family, you leave your friends. It's tiring. So I think that 90% plus still is necessary. And for us, just to put some numbers around it, we spend 300 million a year in terms of our total cost base. Of that, 6 to 7 million is hotels and airplanes. And I can't imagine an organization that travels more than we do. We're trying to serve 15 countries with a sales team of 300 and a total team of 2,500. So it's very fragmented, our marketplace. And 7 million out of 300 is nothing. It's just not a big cost. The real cost is people. And for those people to be as productive as possible, I think they have to be in person. And if in person requires traveling, then business travel doesn't change. So I think that, a little bit less, might have got a bit out of hand. Connectivity helps, but the lion's share of it is absolutely necessary.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tom, for those reflections. Interestingly, not having business travel has meant many benefits too. Certainly, the air has been a little bit cleaner in Bristol. There's no doubt about that. I think we've all heard some of the criticism that the G7 presidents and prime ministers have received, given them traveling to meet in person. But you can also understand the need after such a period of time that we've gone through, the want and wishes to do in-person liaisons and meetings. So I'd like to turn to John now and just share some of the work that he's doing and is thinking about doing at the intersection of business travel and how it affects global challenges such as sustainability.
Thank you, Pally. I think what's been interesting over the last 12 to 18 months or so, and Thomas just suggested this, is that organisations have looked very carefully at their social responsibility, as well as their cost structures. And business travel is, it's exceptionally expensive, or can be, and of course it has quite a significant environmental impact. So, one of my research interests is actually looking at the the compulsion for travel in the business aspect of business travel. And I've been thinking very carefully about trying to reconceptualize and rethink business travel in terms of sustainable business travel. So at what moment in an organization does a particular activity trigger the need for an in-person travel in business travel? And also, if it triggers an in-person need to physically go from A to B, you know, what would be the most efficient form of transport to undertake that activity? So clearly, you know, looking back over, you know, the late 2010s, pre-pandemic, Eurostar was actually, you know, quite a significant player in European mobilities between the UK and the mainland Europe, just as, you know, low-cost airlines and legacy airlines were. But what is significant here, and I'm sure Tom would agree with me, it's actually thinking about strategically what is the trigger for the compulsion for travel, and how can that trigger be, as it were, looked at very carefully to try to ensure that in a previous life someone would just automatically travel, but now in our new life perhaps that automatic necessity to travel is negated by, you know, a more sophisticated and more, as it were, connected and upgraded infrastructure, 5G, 6G, etc., more sophisticated video conferencing, and just the sheer strategic value of, or questioning the shared strategic value of actually in-person travel. Because as Tom has noted, you know, a lot of organizations just automatically engage in business travel, but they may not necessarily strategically think what the, you know, the impacts of that travel will be. Also, they may not actually think whether that travel is actually, you know, value for money with respect to what it can generate with respect to future profitability, revenue and client base. So one of my sort of near future research interests is actually to begin to start a process of doing work with organizations on sustainable business travel, and really focusing in on this question of what triggers travel and how can business tasks be substituted through ICT, virtual proximity. And this is another issue. You can be in virtual proximity. We're all in virtual proximity in a virtual universe, but virtual proximity is something which, you know, can be an important part of an organization extending its global reach across the globe with respect to, you know, future strategic and competitive advantages. So I'm really looking forward to, you know, starting this new initiative.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
We'll be talking to Tom about his own experiences as well. So thanks, Sally.
Wonderful, thank you. I think there'll be a lot of, I think, toing and froing back and forth, I think, and I hope we'll make some really nice new connections with our alumni as well. So we haven't got a lot of time left, so that was great. We've addressed quite a few of the questions, I think, that have already come through on the live Q&A with the pre-submitted questions, and I've thrown in a few extras there. But there are some really interesting comments that are coming in from our audience today, which are focusing on how the office might evolve into more collaborative spaces. And I'm thinking, you know, did the likes of Google and the idea of the Googleplex, did they get it right, you know, from the get-go? And somebody asked me today, in fact, oh, will our new campus have that kind of new environment, given where we are with you know, the pandemic and a new way of being in the workplace. So the comments that are coming in are wondering whether coming back into the workplace, physically coming back into the office, will that be more about creating corporate identity and collegiality and, you know, those things that we can't, they're more difficult to do. And branding is really important. So we'll return to the office, be more about branding and identity. What do you think, Tom?
I think, so I'm loving all these questions. Great questions, not a huge amount of time.
I know.
I
really
think
quick answers, please.
I think ethos and culture and camaraderie is increasingly why people even work at a company. So it's really important. It's really important. It's really hard to muster all that good stuff without being in person.
Absolutely. When you think of these organizations, big international global organizations that rely on their brand, it's going to be really interesting to see how they cope with those sorts of things. Oh, so we've got a question here about young people. So the millennials, the Gen Zs and the Gen Alpha, you know, what will their world be like? I've got a son who left university a couple of years ago, just started his first job with an international strategy firm. He's really enjoying going back into not even back into the office for the first time, a couple of days a week. And his I don't know if it's the CEO, but a very senior person is also located on the same floor in an open plan office. And I think those interactions between senior and more junior people are obviously very important for people's careers. So I just want to turn to Jennifer here, just to comment on how things might be for the younger generations.
Let's hope that there's some positives coming out of all the chaos that we've experienced. But I think that going back to Tom's point about young people and their use of technology and the way that we interact with each other, I think something would have changed there. But I also think that perhaps if you're not going into work 5 days a week, we're going to see the geography of employment shift quite considerably. I know now from our own higher education market that people are looking to perhaps work in places that are further away. So will we see more opportunities for young people to work in different parts of the country? Will this impact on the dominance of London? And will it increase competitiveness for those same positions? So it's hard to work out also how much young people are going to drive the changes and how they're going to enact them as a generation coming into companies run by an older generation. And this speaks to a question actually that was raised about the power of employees to do more flexible work. And now there's more people wanting to work flexibly, and we can make the assumption that younger people will want to. Perhaps it will drive change further.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, Jennifer. Really another interesting point that's being made about not everyone has the same provision at home. Obviously, over the last year or so, we've seen people not moving so much, but the housing market, well, people are moving, some of them moving out of cities for bigger homes so they can have one room in the house which is beautifully dedicated to office work. And some people, of course, are spending more money on their own homes, making sure that one room is again fit for office work. But I think the point that's really being made is that the relationship between the employer, telecommunications, government, and policy is really important as well. You know, if we can have super fast broadband, that's great. A lot of obviously resources from the organisation, which might normally be provided by the organisers, coming from home. So I'm pretty sure we've all racked up our electricity bills a little bit more than we might have done working from home. So interesting, it'll be interesting to see how these new policies take hold. Okay, one more question here around how meetings might work, you know, in the office. We certainly had a meeting about this just the other day. Will we continue to have all virtual meetings, or will we continue to do more hybrid? I won't ask anybody to answer that one, but I think it's an interesting question because it raises the issue of equitable behaviour. But look, I will stop there because I think we're going to get cut off if we don't. I just want to say finally, thank you to everybody on the panel. Fantastic having you here with us. Thank you to everybody that's joined us remotely from around the world. Great. Please keep in touch. This was the first of our discovery events. We hope to have more. And for those that couldn't make it, there'll be a recording that will be circulated afterwards. And if you'd like to know more about what we're doing at the School of Management, about the future of work, or any of our other research themes and projects, please do get in touch with us. Reach out to Jennifer or Jonathan or our alumni, Thomas, or to myself. We'd be delighted to be able to give you the information that you need. and also, of course, invite you to future events. So just a final thank you really from me and the team that have helped make this happen today, that have been working hard in the background. Thank you, everyone. We look forward to meeting up again, virtually, possibly in person, who knows.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.